Music theory with Microsoft Excel, mapping out the mode's absolute unchanging numbering system. Get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin'. And that's what we'll do here with Microsoft Excel. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we'll basically build this from a blank worksheet. But if you do have access, 4 tabs down below. Fretboard, example, practice, blank, the fretboard tab, having a simulated fretboard, which we will be referring back to the example tab, in essence, the finished product, the answer key, if you will. The practice tab, having pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have this, that's okay because we'll be working on the blank tab, which is in essence, as you can see, a blank worksheet, practicing both our music skills as well as our Excel tools at the same time, noting that those two things are actually intimately interwoven. Because whenever we think about music, we have to start visualizing tables and moving things around and whatnot. And how do you practice visualizing tables? You build tables. Not with a paper and pencil, at least if you're me, because you can't draw, but with software, spreadsheet software like Microsoft Excel. So that's what we'll be practicing here. Let's go to the example tab to get an idea of what the end product will be. We're going to practice recreating the table that we made last time when just looking at the musical alphabet. But this time, we're just going to add the way we want to see it that's going to be most useful within Excel. So if you want to go back to the prior presentation to think about the different kind of symbology between the two ways that we can write this system, you can check that out. We'll go over it briefly here, however. Then we will add a new column. That's going to be the modes. And we're going to think about the modes both as modal points, nodes, if you will, in a system. The nodes are the modes. And then we can also think of them as a scale system, which we will get into more later. But for right now, all we are doing is naming the individual points. So there's 12 notes in the musical alphabet. We are going to pick 7 of them using the formula. Why formula? We accept it a priori. We discussed a little bit why they might have come up with it, but we just accept it, which gives us 7 notes. We then want to name each of those notes. I'm going to name them as a node because that's the primary nodes. Those are the primary points that we're going to be using on the guitar. We want to name them. We want to know them. We want to know the relationship, how they get along together, the distances between them. I want to know intimately about the nodes. Now, let me go over to the fretboard just to get a better idea of that and just revisit our overarching idea, because again, it's a little bit different than you might normally think, and we will bridge it into normal kind of writing in terms of intervals. This is going to lead us into where we have problems. So what are we trying to do here? I'm trying to learn the fretboard. This has all of the notes in C major and diatonic modes, but it's movable. So if I learn this shape, I can move it to the 12 different positions, basically covering 12 times 7 modes, all of the dominants, all the scales that we typically use with one kind of master or main shape. There's 3 ways that we can memorize the fretboard. One, the most clear, easy one to first think about is by note. But if you learn it by note, then I'm not seeing the shape. I want to learn the 7 nodes, not all 12 notes per se. Now you could say I could just learn the notes in the key of C. That would be great. That would allow you to play beautifully in the key of C, but it'll be difficult to move up to a different key like the key of D. I couldn't shift the whole shape up because all of the relative positions of the notes will now be different. I could learn by relative scale degree. That's the way that our normal system is set up. That works to shift up if I want to play in the key of a major key or any other key. Usually we learn the major key first, and I can shift everything up. But if I want to play within the modes of the same key, then I have a problem because the scale system renames every time I go to a different note in the same key. That's inefficient. What's the most efficient thing to do? It's to learn the node points, which we're looking at now. It's to learn the actual points that are in this whole shape remains the same. I can copy and paste it up to the 12 different positions. I don't want to change the node points whenever I think about a new scale, whenever I go to a new mode. So again, this is the misconception, because a lot of people will say that the modes are an advanced topic. We're going to ignore them until you get a master's degree or something. It's like, no, that's totally not right. In particular for the guitar, because that's the thing that's going to allow you to maneuver around most efficiently. So that's going to be the general concept we want to think about. We want to think about them in points. Now, why does it become a problem? Because when you write down music, it's based on a scale degree format. And so we're going to lead into that topic and how we're going to deal with that in future presentations. But just a quick kind of look at it, like if I was playing in the key of C or any other modal position, and I go to this node right here, right? And I want to see the distance between this note and this note. That's how we start to build our chords. We look at the distance. How would I count the difference? I can count it in half steps. I know there's a difference between the strings of 5 and then 6, 7. So I can say that there's a distance between these two of 7 notes away. Now we actually call that a perfect fifth. How do we call it a perfect fifth? We rename this as the 1. I'd like to call it node number 6, right? Because it's the Aeolian node, which is 1 through 6. I would like to call it node number 6. But no, we want to name the interval. I have to name that the 1. And let me just try to explain why that's kind of an issue. Like, let's say that you have a basketball hoop here and it's 10 feet high, okay? And then you have like a kid sitting right here, and I'd like to know the distance from the top of that kid's head to the top of the basketball hoop, right? How would you measure that? Well, do you measure from the kid's chin and say, well, if I measure from the kid's chin, I count his head as foot number 1, and then if I measure up, it's 8 feet. No, that's not how you use a measuring tool, right? You measure from the top of his head, and you get 7 feet, right? 7 feet plus the kid is 3 feet, gets you the 10 feet. So the natural system we're using here is kind of forcing us to say, well, if I want to measure the distance, I'm not going to measure from the node. It forces us to use the measuring stick as though that's the first foot. I have to include that foot. That's not how the measuring system normally works, right? And that's what forces us into the scale degree system, where everything's in scale degrees. You could do everything the normal measuring way, right? By saying, I'm going to measure from that point, and that makes it so you don't have to rename the nodes. And then you're always going to be, that's the off by 1 problem. If you're a programmer, you're always going to be off by 1. So you're always 1 step down. So in other words, what I'd like to say is, like, if I call this node number 6, and this is node number 3, or if I look at it as a modal range from Aeolian to Phrygian, an AP modal range, I'm making up new terminology, I know, or a 6-3 modal range, then I could say the distance mathematically would be 3 minus 6, because I have to take the endpoint and it goes around in a circle. So this would really be 3 plus 7, 10 minus 6, or 3 minus 6 is negative 3. There's 7 modes, so 7 minus 3 is 4. So that would mean that this one is what I would call 4 modal half steps away. Again, I'm making up a term, so I'm going to tell you why I make up that term. You're going to say, you're making things more difficult. Okay, I'm just introducing the idea. You don't have to do it this way, but I'm just trying to tie in the concept of visual learning with a caged system to why the naming convention doesn't quite line up, why you're naturally going to hit a problem. So if you say it's 4 modal half steps away, what then is the scale degree? 4 plus 1, 4 plus the root, plus the head of the kid that you insist on me measuring from, right? Which means it's a fifth away. It's a 7 note away, perfect fifth. But really, I want to say, no, it's a 4 modal half step away from the Aeolian node, which is node number 6. See, that's where the problem comes in. I'm just introducing that. Well, that's what we're going to lead into later. I just want to keep on showing you where we're going with it, even if you don't understand everything I just said right there. So we're going to go to the practice tab. This has the preform. Let's go to the blank tab over here. Let's just build this thing out. Stop talking, start doing. You're just a talker, man. You're just a talker. I don't like talker. Okay, let's do it then. I'm gonna select the whole thing here, and then we're gonna right click on it, and we're gonna go to the format cells, and we're gonna go to the currency, and let's get rid of the dollar sign, and let's get rid of the decimals. Okay, and then I'm gonna say okay, and then home tab, font group, let's make it bold, and then I'm just gonna recreate the table that we made before, but this time I'm gonna make it as tight as possible, imagining that I wanna imagine it as cleanly as possible and from an Excel sheet so that I can also build onto my right-hand side over here off of this foundational item. So this time I'm gonna say I'm gonna give myself just the numbers of the notes. And I'm just gonna say it's gonna be the numbers, the note numbers. We're just gonna say it's 1. Remember, I didn't start at 0. I'm starting at 1. And again, a programmer could say I should start at 0, but I think it makes sense for most people to number it from 1. So A is 1. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm gonna select those two. And then if I select the fill handle, I can copy it down to 12. So boom, and you can see the fill handle kind of counts it out as we go. And then I'm going to say the letter. Now, in order for me to simplify the sharps and flats, I'm just going to say we had an A and then we had a B. Remember what they did is they took the piano keys as though you're in the key of C, as though the key of C is special. They might not have thought, I'm being unfair. I don't know what was going through their mind, right? They were probably thinking, hey, look, people only have enough capacity to learn one key. So let's just pick a key. And they made the piano in the key of C so we can play like simple music. But then they made the numbering system based on the key of C. And that leads to our account number problem that they use letters instead of numbers. And when I go back in and fill the gaps in, because now we want to play in all keys, because all keys are the same, just from a natural standpoint, just like all numbers are the same. So now we have to put a number in between. I can't call it A.5, so you end up with this sharp and flat business. So instead of me putting 2 notes here, I'm just going to call it AB. Now remember, why are we doing that? Because this is an easy way for me to say, look, this is A and a half, or B minus a half, however you want to look at it. And that's going to be easier when I go to my fretboard over here. Let's take a look at the fretboard. To label on the fretboard the notes. Now these are all the ones that aren't sharps and flats, but you can see how long that's going to get if I add sharps and flats. Like this is a sharp or it's a flat, right? That's going to take up too much space. That's why. So let's go back on over here and let's say then we have a C and then we've got CD. So it's between a C and a D. So C sharp or D flat, and then we have D, and then we have a D sharp or E flat, the D, E, and then we have E, and then what we naturally call a natural half step. It's not actually natural. We really only have 12 notes. Why do we call that a natural half step? It's a half step using the formula that we started the piano playing on in the key of C. There is no natural half step. They're all a half step away. They are all the same distance away. They're all just like a ruler. There's 12 inches. There's no difference between the distance between these two and these two, right? Why is it a natural half step? Because the formula was based on the 7 notes when it should have been 12 notes first, and then you applied the formula. We should have had 12 notes. And then you apply the formula, right, to get 7 notes. But no, we started with 7 notes. So, and now we're backing into the form. All right, so then we're going to say this is going to be FG, and this is going to be G, and then this is going to be GA between G and A. All right, and then I want to repeat that because remember, there's 2 ways that we want to see and visualize. And where did I put this down? We want to visualize linearly. But we also want to note that in reality, we have this spiral thing happening. It's repeating like a clock, but it's repeating in an octave format. So I want to be able to repeat it. When I repeat it, that you can see it's kind of circular in nature. And then I also want to write it in a circle and envision it whichever way is appropriate for whatever task I'm doing. So I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to say this equals the one above it. So I equal the 1, and if I copy that down, it'll take the relative positions, so I can copy it all the way down, boom, 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 boom. And then I can, to 12, 12. And then I can do that here. I can copy this way, and then pull that one, copy this down, and we repeat it. So then I'm going to make them a little bit different color so I can see the difference between the two. So maybe I select this top bit, and I right-click, and I say, well, let's not right-click. Let's go to the Home tab and say I want to make this blue and then bordered. And then down here, I'm going to make this bordered, and let's make it green, a light green like this one. And then I'm going to double-click this one, making it skinny. Double-click here, making it as skinny as possible. Select these two. I'm going to go up top, Home tab, Font Group, and then make this black and then white. Now, what I'd like to do is combine those two together. So let's just call this both, this time numbers and letters. And I'm going to go Font Group, boom, boom, and then make it centered. So how do I combine them together? I can use a cool formula, equals, and I'm just going to say, go to that 1, and then I'm going to say, and A. So now I'm just going to call it 1A. You can call it A1. Maybe you'd like to see it the other way, A1. I wonder if that would be a better way to write it, now that I think about it. Like if we looked at our fretboard over here, and I had 11G, would it be easier to see if I reversed this and called it G11? I almost think it would. Maybe I'll reverse that. But let's keep it going for now. We'll keep it now. I'll mull that over. Keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe I should reverse it. Call it A1 instead of 1A. I don't know. But let's copy it down. It's the same either way. Let's copy it down. Nothing is set in stone here. If I find a better way, I will do it a better way, because that's the only thing that matters. The best system is what matters. Why are you using the system you're using? I'm going to copy this down. Because my daddy made this. I don't care whose daddy made the system. This is America. We use the best. We judge the system by merit and merit alone. I don't care whose daddy the system is. I'm trying to build a musical cathedral, and you're telling me to measure things by measuring the top of the kid's head when I'm trying to see how high it is from the kid's head to the top of the basketball hoop. That's not how you do it. I don't care. I'm going to do it the right way so that I can make my musical cathedral, because there's no way it's getting built if you make me measure everything that way. That's not how we do things here. We do it the best way, the most efficient way. That's all. That's all. Merit, man. That's all it. Okay. I'm going to hit black and white and then center. I don't care whose daddy the system is. Okay, so now we're going to apply out our formula and just name the nodes. Now I'm going to get into the formula more later, so I don't want to spend too much time on the formula. I just want to pick the notes. Now we already know what the notes are, because the notes that don't have the sharps and flats are the ones that we applied. And I'm going to use the key of C, not because it's special, but because of the way it was built just happens to work, that it now gives us a system where if I use the key of C and I don't have any sharps and flats, that tells me it's an internal control. So now that it is the way it is, it's easy for us to use that key to kind of practice with, right? So how do we build this? Like we have 12 notes. How would we know which notes to build? I could build off of any note, but you're going to apply this formula, which is going to be, I'm going to start on the key of C. It's going to be whole step, and then it's going to be a whole step, and then it's going to be a half step. That's why they call it a natural half step, but it's only a natural half step because we're playing in the key of C. If I applied the formula to the B, then it wouldn't be, that's not where the half step would be. So I know that's a little wonky. That's because of the naming convention. Pretend it's just notes 1 through 12, and you'll see what I mean. It shouldn't, there's nothing different. It's just, they're all the same distance notes. It's not, there's nothing, okay, different. So let's go, it's going to be a whole step, and then we're going to go whole step. I'm going to name this differently because now we're going around the circle. So I'm going to make it a different color. We'll make that yellow. And then it would go whole step, and then it ends off back where we started to C. So you can see we go around a circle. You can envision this as a line that's repeating, or a circle. When you get from this G to that A, you can also imagine it going up here. So I can make this one, you know, maybe I'll make it a slightly lighter color maybe because it's behind it, right? So it goes do, 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 and then you can go back around here or continue going up this way. And then if I went down this way, then it would keep going this way with, so there's whole step, and then half step, and then whole step. Now what I want to do then is name all of these points. So I have to use the Greek names. This gets confusing because people don't like, I don't speak Greek, so it's confusing to me, or ancient Greek. I'm not sure this is modern Greek either. I don't speak either. So that's a little bit wonky. So Ionian, that's the major node. You can call it the major node, but the mode name is Ionian. Dorian, so we'll come up with abbreviations later. Then we have the Phrygian, then we have the Lydian, then we have the Aeolian, then we have the Aeolian, and then, no, wait a sec, I'm off by one. This is the Mixolydian. Mixolydian, I'm trying to look at my cheat sheet so I spell it right. Aeolian, hopefully my cheat sheet is right. Spelling is not my forte, especially in ancient Greek words. And then Locrian. Okay, so then let's make this, are they Greek or Latin? I don't know. I don't even know if they're Greek or Latin. That's not what the course is about, whether they're Greek or Latin. So we're gonna make a shortcut for them so I can memorize them better. I don't care where they're from. Do they work? No, they're too long. I can't. I'm going to make an abbreviation. That's what I'll do. All right? So what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say then that we want to name these notes. So we have the notes. So now I'm just going to apply these notes. So we've got then the C, we've got the D, we've got the E, we've got the F, we've got the G, we've got the A, and we've got the B. So we've reconstructed, in essence, the notes on the piano, which they call like the natural scale, but there's nothing special about it. It's just that we applied the formula to the C. We would get all different notes if we applied the formula to the C sharp, and it would just be just as valid of a scale. And you can see that once again if you concentrate on the numbers and not on the fact that you have these weird sharps and flats happening. So, but this is going to be, so those are our notes. Now notice what we want to do is I could imagine a nodal system where I look at this layer, all of the notes, like the actual notes, all 12 of them, and give them a nodal name and look at the distances between all of them. But that's not really going to help me play because what we're playing in is typically going to be some kind of scale. And the scales in Western music are based on 7 notes, and you could drop it down to 5 that fit within the 7. We can get into that later. But that means that what I'd like to do then is just take the 7 nodes, and now I have another relationship. I have another set of notes that are layered on top of it. So I want my base layer to be as clean as possible. That's why the numbering system would be better. And then I can layer on top of it the notes that I pull out as the primary nodes that I'm going to be working with within my system as I'm actually fingering the guitar. So these are the ones I really want to know a lot about. But note that when I think about the actual like distance in notes, we call them whole steps and half steps. Whole steps is, a half step is 1 step away. A whole step would be 2 steps away, right? So that's a normal terminology. We don't usually use those for this series of notes, but I think it's a useful term. So I'm going to introduce that term. I'm going to say this is our modes that we're going to be applying. And I'm going to say that there's going to be a modal half step between these series of notes, right? A modal half step from C to D is actually 3 note half steps. So I want to introduce that idea, and we could have a modal whole step because that's how we make chords. How do we make chords? We take modal whole steps from the series of notes that we're using in our system, 7 of them, that have been laid on top of or pulled from the bass note system. Okay, so we'll introduce that idea now. We're going to keep on moving though. So then we're going to say the mode. I'm going to abbreviate the mode now to make it a little bit easier on me. So I'm going to say door, and then ein, dord, and then fri, and then lid, and then mix, and then eo, and then lok. So that's a little bit easier. Doesn't sound as cool Greek, but then I can see those a little bit easier. I'm going to make it even a shortcut. I'm going to give them a mode. This is like what I'm normally going to abbreviate them as. A small I, a small d, not to be confused with the note D, which is normally a large D, I'm going to say. And then I'm going to say this one, I'm going to call it a P, a small P. This one, I don't want to call it a small L because it looks like a 1. So I'm going to call it a Y for Lydian. That's a little weird. Mixolydian, I don't want to get it mixed up with major or minor. So I'm going to call it X for Mixolydian. And then I'm going to call Aeolian a small a. Hopefully that doesn't get mixed up with an A note. And then the Locrian, again, I don't want it to be an L. So I'm going to call it an N, which is the end of the word Locrian. And the Locrian's the funny one. So I'm going to say we kind of spell it backwards using the last letter because Locrian's crazy. Okay, so then we're going to say, so that's going to be my symbol system. Now, notice that because we have letters, though, we could, once we get to chords, I'm going to use capital letters to indicate if I'm building a chord and it's the root of the song versus a secondary chord of the song. So I'm usually going to use these letters, but I'll capitalize them possibly in chord construction when we get into a future presentation. So I just want to introduce that now. Again, I'm getting wonky. You might say, I'm not using any, you're just building crazy stuff, okay? You don't have to use it, but I think it makes sense. So we'll kind of give it, now I'm also going to give it a numbering system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 modes. So now I can see of the 12 notes, we now have a 7-note modal system. And this is going to be the numbering system. I don't want to make it a scale. Meaning, when I go to the Dorian, I don't want it to force me to say that now that is the 1. I want to say, no, it's still the 2, just like the Knights on the Round Table. Lancelot is not now King Arthur just because he's talking. He's still Lancelot. He's at a round table. He doesn't have to move to the head of the table in order to speak because it's a round table. So he keeps his same name, okay? And then, well, how can I measure the intervals if he keeps the same name? Well, how do you measure you don't measure the top of the kid's head as foot 1. You measure from that point to measure the intervals, right? I measure from the top of his head, not from the chin of his head. And then we can come up with everything works out the same, but you end up with a off by 1 problem. But why, again, this is where the problem comes in from the naming construction to what we're doing now. So what I'd like to do is think about the normal, what would naturally be done if you were measuring things normally, right? And then bridge that in, because you will end up with an off by 1 problem, to the scale system so that we can see both systems. And that'll help us not to let the terminology force us out of the natural cage type shape-based systems that we would like to use, particularly on the guitar. Now I'm going to put these both together now, and I can use the same kind of thing. Again, do I want the 1 first or the name first? So I think it's actually better to have this one first, I and the 1. So I and the 1. I'll copy that down. So there we have it. So now these, why is there a space here? Because I had a space after this one. No spaces. Okay. So now these is what I'm going to put in my fretboard. So let's go to the fretboard. So now when I learn the fretboard, I can see this is Ionian. I can see this is an N for Locrian for the end of it. I can also see it's 7. It's the 7th node. So now I can look at the relationships by nodes, and that is completely transferable. I can also look at the distances between nodes. I don't have to make this the 1 to see the distance between here and here. No, I want to say, look, whenever I go from the Locrian to the Phrygian, no, to the Lydian, it's going to be 5, 6, a distance of 6. So the modal range, I'm going to call it, of an NY modal range or a 7/4 modal range is going to be a distance of 6. How many modal half steps is it? Well, it's going to be the end point minus the starting point. 4 minus 7 gives me a -3. and then there's only 7 notes. It goes around in a circle. So 7 minus 3 is 4, right? So we can get then the modal half step. How many modal half steps? There's 4 modal half steps. The other way you could see it is that 7 is the end of the circle. It goes around in a circle. So 7, count on your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4 from there, right? So it's 4 modal half steps away, which means what would it be in scale degrees from this note? If I count that as the 1, 4 plus 1, right? Which means it would be a fifth, a fifth away. So it'd be a flat fifth in this case of the B. And that's what we would normally want to call it because we'd have the Locrian, which has the flat fifth to it, right? So I'm just introducing that concept now. Hopefully that makes sense, that everything kind of lays out that way, and then we don't have to change the names. Now look how much easier if I just drop the notes all together, and I was just say, let's just look at the fretboard like this. So now I don't even care what the notes are. I just want to see it by the knights on the round table. I just want to see them all by node. And I'm just going to memorize all of the nodes. And I'm going to look at all the relationships between all the nodes. I don't really care what the starting point is per se. I just want to know that's where the location is. And I want to know the distances between each of them. And if I can learn that, then that will allow me to build chord constructions that are actually more specific because they tell me where I am on the fretboard. They don't force my mind to think that I'm moving between a C major and a G major, the 1 to the 5. If I go from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, then it's not like I'm shifting the shape. It's the same shape. I'm actually playing a 1 shape, which I would call from a chord perspective a major shape or Ionian shape. The Mixolydian has the first 3 notes if you were to call it a major shape, but it's a Mixolydian chord because that will help me identify it in the system, right? So I'm going to when I say I'm going to the 1, 4, 5 of a C major, then I want to note that the 4 and the 5, although they have the first 3 notes as though we shifted the shape, are actually different shapes. I want to still see the shape, that we're going to within the big master shape rather than changing the perspective in my mind. That's the general idea that we're going to with this. And again, I don't think anybody argues on the guitar about like the caged system. Some people still do. The caged system's not the way you do it and so on. But I think most people accept that some shape-based learning is just natural. What the problem is, again, is with the communication once you're in the shape-based learning to then apply the distance calculations, which again force you to measure the top of the kid's head every time you want to measure distance, which is weird. That's not normal. That's not how normal people measure things. All right, you can't build a cathedral. I can't. Okay. Let's make this black and white. I'm going to go up top and say home tab font group. I'm going to make this black and white, and then let's center it. Let's select this whole bit, and I'm going to make this bordered, and let's make it blue. Now underneath this will repeat again. So I could do the same thing and just say this equals the C, copy that across, and then I can copy that down so that it will repeat. So we have this same circular kind of concept. And then I'm going to make that, let's make that a slightly different color. Let's make it the green that we were doing. Okay, and then let's rebuild the circle. I'm going to try to do this fairly fast because we're running long on time. I'm babbling too much. I'm trying to give ideas of where we're going too much. What do they call those? Illusions in storytelling or something. Let's make this. So this is going to be equal to the C. Let's recreate our circle. And now we'll add to the circle, the inside of the circle, these 7 notes. So on the outside of the circle, we can think about it as this is U and U5. We're going to say this is going to be equal to this one, and then we're going to say in W7, that's going to equal then this one, and then in W8 is going to equal the one after the D, and then we're going to say in V, 11, V11, really? Yeah. V11 is going to equal the E, and then we're going to say in T13 is going to equal the F. I want to choose this one. Did I pick up the right one? Yeah. And then we're going to say in R15 is going to equal the 10 FG, and then in P13 is going to equal the G, and then in N11 we're going to say this equals this one. Hopefully I got that right. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. No. Yeah, no, that's right. And then we're going to say in M8 is going to equal the A. Let's do it down here. And then in M6 is going to equal this one. And then in O4 is going to equal the B, and then that takes me back up here. So we have that kind of circle, and then inside, and then we have our wholes and halves, right? So now if I think of it as a circle, which notes are we doing? We start here, and then we go whole step, and then we go whole step, and then we go half step. Something is off. This one doesn't look right. Why is this so close? This needs to be out here. This one is on, this should be in V. This one is in V, and then this one is in, this one should be in T. Oh, dude. And this one should be R. This one needs to be over here. It doesn't look right. Let's make this a little smaller so I can see. It'd be easier if I could see the whole thing. All right, then, and then we go whole step, and then whole step, and then half step back home. All right, let's put some borders. I'm holding down Control to highlight non-adjacent cells. And we're going to go borders around that. And then inside here, now I'm going to say in the inner circle, R6. Let's say R6 is right here. We're going to put the inner ones, which I'm going to say is Ionian 1. Or let's just say, I'm just going to call it, maybe it would be better to call it I1. Let's do I1. It's not what I had in my cheat sheet, but I think that would be better. And in our case, that's the C, right? And then over here on T7, on T7, we're going to say that something's weird. Hold on. This needs to be pulled up. This needs to be pulled up to there. And then we go to T7, and we get the, I'm just going to say it's going to be the next note. Let's say it's this note. We're going to pull that note, and we're going to call that that's the D2. And then we're going to say that down here, we have then the E gets pulled in, and I'm going to call the E is going to be a P3. And then we're going to say that we have then the F, and that's going to be called the Lydian, which is Y4. And then we're going to say the G, and that's going to be the Mixolydian, X5. And then we're going to say that we have the A, and that's going to be, now hold on. We don't have enough room here. I'm going to add another, select up top M, right click and insert. And then I'm going to format it to clear the formatting. And then I'm going to pull this one to the right. Okay, so there we have room. So now we're going to say this should be then the Aeolian, which is A6. And then above that we have the B. And that's going to be then, the B is going to be N7. Okay, so there we have it. So now I'm going to say, let's make this like black and white in the middle, let's say. So now we can envision both of these things linearly or in a circle. Okay, so now also note that you might see this, it's kind of useful sometimes to use Roman numerals to number these because that tells you if it's a major or minor. But I think that's less necessary if you don't keep changing the modes, because you start to memorize that the 1, 4, 5 are the minors, or we start to note that the Ionian, the Lydian, the Ionian, Phrygian, and the Lydian are the major. But just note the term. I'll just add one more column. Insert here. I'm going to say this is the Roman numbers. Roman numbers. And let's do it. Let's do Roman numbers this way. And so we could then do the Roman numbers. We usually call this Roman number 1. You can say equals Roman. And the thing that's cool about Roman numbers, use a little formula, is that they can either be uppercase or lowercase. So if I put a 1, it does it. That's the Roman numeral 1, because it's going to be, and that tells us that it's going to be a major chord when we get to chord. So I just want to introduce this idea. And then we're going to say this is going to be Roman, but then I'm going to say it's lower, and then 2. Lower case. How do you do that? I forgot. I had it backwards. I got to do equals lower for lowercase tab, and then Roman, embedding Roman tab, and then 2, and then it puts 2 little i's, and then I'm going to say this is also lower. You have to say equals lower tab, and then Roman tab, and then 3. Enter. And then this is going to be just Roman, because it's upper by default, tab, and then this is 4. And that's an uppercase. And then Roman, or equals, Roman tab 5. And then now I need a lower again. Lower, this is going to be equals lower tab, Roman tab, and this is going to be 6. Now this one has a period after it. So you got to say something like it's going to be because it's a diminished, has a flat 5, so it's like it would be equals lower tab, Roman tab, and then 7, but then I want like a period after it, so I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to say and at the end, and then I have to put quotes to put a period, to put text, period, text. Now that's what I'm going to use to represent the diminished, is a period. So what does this do for you? If you build chords, you can say the capital ones, 1, 4, 5, are capital modes. We'll talk more about that later. I just want to introduce that concept because you'll probably see it. But again, once we work with this, we'll start to see that the mode Ionian, Lydian, Mixolydian are major modes. They have a major third in them if you look at it from a scale degree standpoint. So we'll talk more about that later. But that's the general idea. Hopefully I started on cell B. That's funny. Let's delete the A over here. Don't need that. Delete that. Why did you do that? That's weird. That's weird. It's like measuring from the kid's chin when you're trying to measure how far. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? I don't care whose system it is. My daddy's made, that system was made in the 1600s, the 1700s by the father of this. I don't care whose daddy the system, I'll grade the system by merit. It's a merit-based system. If I'm building something here, I can't be using some system just because someone's daddy said it. All right, that's how it's going to go.